Hello and welcome to episode 14 of the Primary Maths Podcast, the show where we talk all things primary maths. I'm John Cripwell.
And I'm Becky Brown.
How are you this week, Becky? You've been back to school for your one day in class. How was that?
I have been back to school. It was lovely to meet a new class of children, John, but one day is not enough time really to do all the things you want to do in your working week in school. But yeah, it was a good start. Thank you. How's your week been?
Yeah, no, mine's been good. I've been putting some finishing touches to a PD course on EYFS maths. So look out for that if you are new to maths leadership, or if EYFS maths is not your strong suit, as it wasn't for me for many years. So I spent a day putting the finishing touches to that and recording some content for that and things. So that's been very good. So what have we got coming up today, Becky?
So I can't believe we're on episode 14 already, John. But in this episode, we're talking about the joys and challenges of teaching and leading maths in the primary classroom.
Yep, and I was joined by my friend Lewis Horsley, who is a Year 2 teacher at the school in Nottinghamshire. He's also a Teaching for Mastery specialist with the East Midlands West Maths Hub. He teaches teaching students, and he's also leading on the NPQLPM. I think those are all the right letters in the right order. So he's a very busy man, and I was delighted that he could find some time to come and talk to us, because it's always great to talk to teachers like yourself, Becky, who are still in the classroom and doing this stuff day to day. We talked about what makes maths lessons engaging for pupils and for teachers, the importance of talk and why a noisy classroom might just be a productive classroom. And also we had a great conversation about how collaborative planning can be a really useful vehicle for professional development in schools when you're working with teachers. And Lewis very kindly shared his top tips for running a session on collaborative planning as well.
Yeah, it's a great interview today, John. Lewis is thoughtful, grounded in research, and he really has a knack for making things feel achievable. It's really inspirational listening to him talk. So make sure you stick around after the interview for our debrief too, where we'll unpack what all this means for subject leaders and teachers. And there's plenty of takeaways that you'll want to try for yourself.
Absolutely. So before we jump into the maths of life, I'm curious to see what you've got for us this week, Becky. But just a reminder that last week I was joined by Pete Mattock, and we discussed how to make the tricky transition from Key Stage 2 into Key Stage 3 most effective. It was a great episode. There was lots of practical takeaways from a maths leadership point of view. So if you are a maths leader or a school leader in a primary or a junior school, or you're interested in that transition point, go back and have a listen if you missed that one.
And if you enjoy this show and you don't want to miss an episode, we'd really appreciate it if you could give us a follow or hit subscribe on whichever platform you're listening or watching on, including on YouTube.
Yep, and you can always drop us an email at primarymathspodcast@twinkle.co.uk, or leave a YouTube comment if you'd like to get in touch. We would, as always, love to hear from you. And we have heard from somebody that I will share with you in my Maths of Life, Becky, in a couple of minutes.
Brilliant. Looking forward to hearing that, John.
Yeah, but first, I'm interested in your story, Becky. What have you spotted in your world of maths recently?
Well, obviously, John, I spent quite a lot of my week this week watching old maths sitcoms, as suggested by you last week. But I have managed to squeeze a little bit more Maths of Life in. So my Maths of Life is a little one this week, but it came from watching an advert with my eldest son. So adverts isn't something that we tend to watch much of these days. So much is on record and catch up, and you don't get to watch them, which is not necessarily a bad thing.
I guess you see them more on sort of YouTube and streaming, things like that, don't you, I guess?
That's it, isn't it? Adverts have evolved a little bit now, and they're very much more suited to when you're maybe looking through Reels or YouTube. But we wanted to watch particular film that we could only find on an on-demand service that came with adverts. So much to our frustration, we had to sit through them. But the one that fostered this discussion was I can't remember the exact advert, but it was a car advert. And as part of the talking about all the wonderful features of the car, one of the things that came up was a measurement that was described as 900 millimeters. And Jacob's question was, well, why haven't they just written 90 centimeters? Which then prompted a little discussion. So we talked a little bit about how sometimes there is a particular unit of measurement linked to certain things. My knowledge of cars wasn't enough to know if that was the case in this situation. But I asked him what he thought. I said, well, why do you think they've done that? And he said, well, because it probably sounds better. And it led me to thinking about all the ways that maths is used in a persuasive manner. I know you talked a little bit before, John, about percentages over fractions and why certain things are more appealing to our brains in maths. But we were talking then about things like prices being £4.99 rather than £5, and how it just, when I did a little bit of research, it was about how the psychology behind it was that you see the first number and it takes a while for everything else to catch up. So even if you might think you're rounding it quickly in your head to £5, your brain is seeing that 4 and it's just a little bit more appealing than 5. Affectionately known as charm pricing, which was a phrase I hadn't come across before. But I thought it was just quite interesting to have that discussion around how maths can be used to your advantage sometimes, depending on how you presented it to your audience.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think probably with things like the car advert as well, millimeters is often seen as a bit more accurate and therefore a bit more technical. So if you want to make something sound technical, you can describe it in millimeters rather than centimeters. I know when I worked in the DT department, we always used to ask for everything measured in millimeters so that it was more accurate than measuring it in centimeters or in feet, as some children would measure it because they'd never used a tape measure before, and they'd just come with a number rather than a unit of measurement. You just have a piece of paper and it would say, I want a piece of wood and I want it to be 3x6, like 3x6 what? So yeah,
Importance of units.
exactly. Yeah, it is. I think we're wising up a little bit to the £4.99 thing, though, don't you think? I don't know. I automatically kind of round that these days to £5.
Yeah, I think I do too.
I was thinking the other day because I was on Substack. I have a Substack if anybody's interested in reading some recent research. I write about recent maths research and things on there. And mine is completely free, but some people charge for sort of premium versions of their Substack articles, and you might get some added bonus bits if you subscribe to them. And somebody's that I was looking at, that he charged £6 a month, and I was thinking, well, why £6? But why £6? Why not £5? Or why not £7? And I guess why not £5? Well, £6 is more than £5, so that's obvious, isn't it? But does £6 seem more acceptable to spend on a throwaway subscription than maybe £7 or £8?
Yeah, it's
And I
interesting.
guess it does.
There was a lot of research, and I haven't written it all down, so I don't want to share it incorrectly, but about studies that had happened about pizza toppings and how people were more likely to pay a higher amount and take off the amount of toppings they didn't want than they were to
Yeah.
pay for a standard and add the toppings on. So there was all sorts of research around it and how our brains see things in different ways. It's really interesting.
Yeah, there's definitely something about the psychology of value, isn't there? I was listening on to the radio because it was my first school run of the school year this morning. So I took my daughter to school this morning. She has been back Mondays, Tuesdays, but I get out of the school run on a Monday and Tuesday. We had the radio on this morning, and we had Radio 2 on, and Scott Mills was talking to Ellie Brennan, who I think does the travel. But she was talking about the tube strikes in London that are happening at the moment this week. We're recording this on Wednesday the 10th. It will go out next Tuesday. And she was saying that she walked home yesterday, which took her about 3 hours because she didn't want to pay £8 for a taxi because of the tube strikes. So she was happier to walk home, sort of 3 hour walk home. However, she wouldn't blink at paying £7 for a pint in a pub. and that idea of what you value and where, you know, she sees that as a luxury thing that she doesn't mind spending £7 on, but she would balk at paying, you know, £7 to save herself 3 hours and a lot of legwork to get home. So I thought that was quite funny. Made me think about the same sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's good.
My maths of life this week was inspired firstly by Lewis, actually, our guest today. We had a little conversation afterwards, and he was telling me he's got into, I think he must have reached a certain age, Becky, because lots of, mostly men, I have to say, but people generally get to a certain age recently and they seem to start playing paddle. And Lewis is not immune to this, and he has started playing paddle. He lives in Nottingham, but he's playing in Derby. And I said, we were talking about podcasts, actually. This is how it came about. He said he doesn't listen to that many because his journey to work is about 3 minutes in the car. So he doesn't get time to listen to them. He said, actually, you know, it's about one song to get from home to work. And then he was telling me about playing paddle in Derby. And I said, well, that must be, you know, long enough to listen to it's about 13 miles, 14 miles. It must be long enough to listen to a podcast. And he said, well, that's kind of half a Razorlight album distance. And he said he stopped thinking about units of measurement in miles and things. He thinks about things in songs as a non-standard unit of measurement, which I quite liked and I started thinking about. And so I was talking about it last night, and my mate Paul, he said that he stopped listening to music in races. I'm just reading it off his message here, actually, because he used to try and work out how many songs he had left, and then he'd get disheartened when he was running a race, you know, if he realised he's still got another 4 songs to listen to before he finished. So he's actually switched to podcasts and audiobooks now because they're varying in length. And then he went on to say that if a song's about 5 minutes long and he's doing a park run, it takes him about 25 minutes at the minute to run a park run. So he knows he's got about 5 songs. If it gets onto a 6th song, he's really disappointed because he figures that he's taken too long to run. Whereas I do listen to music when I'm running. I seem to remember. I haven't been running for a little while. I need to get back into it. It's been a couple of weeks. But I think I would struggle to count the songs while I'm running. I tend to sort of switch off and stop thinking about that. But I may have mentioned this before, but I do tend to do quite a lot of maths when I'm running. I'm sort of changing things, converting things between kilometres and miles and how much longer I've got left. And if I run at this pace, if I speed a little bit, how much quicker I can finish, all those sorts of things. So there's a lot of maths going on when I'm running, obviously. But I did like this idea of non-standard units of measurement. So I'd be interested if anybody out there listening has any other non-standard units of measure that they tend to use in their day-to-day life, their maths of life. How are you measuring things, you know, in your daily life that you could use an actual unit of measurement for, but you've decided it's more fun to use something else. So that was my maths of life. Primary Maths Podcast at twinkle.co.uk, or leave us a YouTube comment if you've got a non-standard unit of measurement. You got any, Becky?
Well, I love that, John, but I was just thinking how it could be really non-standard depending on who you're listening to. Just thinking if you were listening to, for example, a Beatles album, those songs are going to be quite short.
Mm-hmm.
If you were listening to, I'm trying to think what a nice song, maybe a
Meatloaf
Meatloaf album.
Go Meatloaf. I was just thinking Meatloaf. Yeah, we're on we're on the same wave. I'm not sure what it says about us, Becky, but we're on the same wavelength here.
Yeah.
Thinking about an 8-minute.
Actually.
Yeah.
So I wonder, actually, I might look into it for next week, shortest song ever, longest song ever. And I was just thinking as you were saying that, John, how maybe you should have a feature of compressing the episode into a length of a song, just for those people who have only got that long to listen.
Yeah, we'll do a really short version. I would just sort of say every third word or something, and or just cut my bits out. I'd make it more interesting and shorter. Yeah, if there's an appetite for that out there, just let us know. Usual means.
Okay, so now it's time for this week's guest interview.
My guest today is currently a Year 2 teacher at his school in Nottingham. He's in his 11th year of teaching at Chetwynd Spencer Academy, where he leads both Key Stage 1 and Maths, and he's also a member of the senior leadership team. Beyond his own school, he works with the Derby Research School as an ELE and with the East Midlands West Maths Hub as a primary mastery specialist. He's also closely involved in teacher training, supporting new entrants to the profession as a subject specialist and moderator for the George Spencer skit. And just to keep himself busy, he's recently started facilitating on the new NPQLPM, all the letters there, course, all while completing his own NPQH. My guest today is Lewis Horsley, and I'm delighted to have him on the show. Welcome, Lewis.
Hey, John, how you doing?
Yeah, really good. Thank you, mate. Really good. So for the listeners, should just point out that we have actually met in real life once or twice. Lewis,
it was great, John. It was great, haven't we?
Yeah. So we've both done some work for the East Midlands West Maths Hub as primary mastery specialists. How long have you been working with them?
I think it's 11. I think it'll be about around 7 years now. I think, and yeah, really enjoying it. Sort of, there was a teacher that I worked quite closely with who was a primary mastery specialist, cohort 1. She sort of hinted that it was something that she thought I'd like to do, and I thoroughly enjoyed that as a sort of side thing to teaching.
Yeah, it's great. And we'll get into a little bit more about that later. But yeah, I think we've known each other probably 6 or 7 years then, in that case, in one way or another. So I always ask this, Lewis, what was maths like for you at school? Can you remember? I mean, you're a young man, Lewis, I'm sure you can remember back to primary school. What were maths lessons like?
I think it started from my dad. My dad loved maths. He was an engineer. So I know at home I would be constantly doing things that involved a number and things like that. But primary school, I absolutely loved it. I had a great Year 6 teacher, and I still do know him now, actually. And I just remember primary school maths, I found it fun. I think it was because I don't feel like I had to work very hard in it. So sort of had that at primary school, really enjoyed it. Moved into secondary school, still really enjoyed it at secondary school. But then I think towards the end of GCSEs, A levels, I did choose to do it at A level, and I sort of lost the love for it a little bit. And I think it sort of came from me not quite knowing why I needed to know it. Whereas I thought at primary school, there was enough there to make me feel like I needed maths in my life, and my dad would be constantly encouraging that you need this if you do this. And whereas I think when I couldn't see the purpose in it, I think that's when I stepped back and I found it harder because I had to work hard at A level maths. I had to work hard, whereas I think at primary and secondary, I probably got by without putting an awful lot of effort in.
I think I found the same sort of thing with A level English probably. But yeah, it's funny because I was talking to in last week's episode, I was talking to my colleague Pete Mattock, who is a secondary teacher, and he had a similar sort of experience in that he really enjoyed maths up until A level, and then suddenly it all changed. And we sort of talked a little bit about why that is, why A level seems to be such a big stepping stone up from GCSE maths, although apparently that may have changed in the last few years. So you never know, Lewis, you go back and enjoy it more now. So you really did enjoy maths at school then, whereas I it wasn't my favourite subject. So I can sort of understand how you've ended up going down the maths route maybe a little bit more than I did. So what did you do at uni?
So at university, going back to A levels, didn't really try as hard as I could have done. I thought GCSEs, I didn't really put an awful lot into revision. There's a few quick wins. I learned a few tricks to get through some of those tests, and sort of approached A levels in a very similar way, both AS and the A levels. So I didn't do that well. And around being at college, I thought teaching was something that I wanted to do. So, but when I got my results, I was a bit gutted really that I didn't get onto primary ed. So I had a friend at college that was quite wise in sort of different avenues of ways to get around things, and there was a course called Youth Studies, and that allowed me to still become a teacher afterwards because it was close enough that I could do a PGCE afterwards. But also for me, when I was at college, it was teaching or being a police officer. And youth studies, despite it not being primary school children, it was more teenagers, it allowed me to look at education, but at the same time, look at the crime and criminal justice side. So it kept both of those things going, but it ended up with me realizing I did really want to be a teacher. So I did that at university, took a year out, was a TA back where I went to primary school. My mum worked there. The head teacher was still the same. The year 6 teacher I mentioned earlier was still there, and it was strange because they let me in the staff room, and I had to call the teachers by their first name. And
I did that. I went. Yeah, I didn't go back for as long as you. I only went back for a couple of days work experience, but because I'd been working in a secondary as a sort of TA before I did my PGCE. So I went back and had just a couple of days at my old primary school, and it was really weird. I mean, obviously everything was a lot smaller than I remembered it, but going in the staff room. Although I think they weren't smoking in the staff room anymore, which I seem to remember being a thing when I was at school. But going in there, and some of the teachers were still there, calling them by their first name. Yeah, very odd. Very odd.
And I think that school was lovely. And I think after just a few days there, I thought, I want to be a teacher and I want to be here. So I was a TA there for a year, managed to get applied for a few skit/PGCE routes. And one of them would have allowed me to have been at my primary school. But I walked into another skit provider, and it was based at Chetwynd and my days. I left that saying, you were my bottom choice before I walked here, the course, because there was probably 12 schools that I could have ended up at, but I walked in thinking I'm just going to turn up to be professional, to sort of have a good run at it, and I left thinking I need to be here. And they rang me up and said, we know you really want to work at your other primary school, is there any way you would choose our course? And I said, well, only if I could be at Chetwynd, which I know is not sort of allowed, and it just came to be.
What was it about the school, Lewis? I mean, I always think it's a little bit like buying a house. You just walk in and you feel at home. And
smell of bread and the smell of coffee.
Do you mean that's it? Yeah, that's it.
I mean, they got that down to a T. So, I mean, I think for you and anyone that works in a primary school, there's, I think, something that you can't explain. You walk in somewhere, and like you said, house, it felt like home. From the minute I walked in, just the ladies in the office who are still there now, and they're like my school mum, and being offered a drink early, and that's not always the case. I think the more I do outreach, the more I think that some of those things that we were brought up knowing, offer people a drink, make sure they know where the toilets are, where they can sit down. It just ticked all those boxes. The head was wonderful. They checked in on us. The kids were lovely. So I think there's a combination, but I can't explain that feeling when you walk in somewhere. It was vibrant, colourful, noisy, and I thought, I want to work here. And you've been there ever since, is that right? Yeah. So I think they've tried moving me out, but no.
Despite their best efforts.
Yeah. So did the skit there, and then was really fortunate actually that a job came up, because it's not a dead cert that it turns into a job. And I mean, it was quite funny because in my skit year, we were looking at building plans and things like that. And one of my days, I came in my shirt and my tie, and we needed to quickly move some things in the forest school area and in the field. And I quickly ran to the next door neighbours, got a wheelbarrow, got some mud, and I ended up sort of moving some slabs and things. And that's where my classroom is today. I filled in the holes. I moved a few things out of the way. That meant that the builders could come and build a classroom, which is now turned into mine. So it's quite a nice story.
The lengths you go to make sure you had a job there. You started building your own classroom.
And I did say, if I get a job, I didn't know there was a job coming. I said to the head at the time, Lorraine, who's still our head, I said, if I get a job here, I'll restart Pond Club, because it was near the pondy sort of area, and we spoke about it was great to have a pond here, and it's still a work in progress, the Pond Club.
Of course. You've got enough going on by the sounds of it. Just one really quick thing: the NPQLPM course. What are all those letters? NPQ, obviously, we know, but the LPM.
LPM, leading primary mathematics.
There you go.
So yes, it's one of the newer ones. It's in its third cohort now. So yeah, facilitator on that through one of the lead facilitators for NPQs.
Amazing. And we'll definitely get onto a bit of that sort of stuff in a while. But what I really wanted to talk to you about this morning, Lewis, was teaching, funnily enough. Although we did have a conversation off air about football first, but we'll stick with teaching for now. So just to start with then, you said that your own sort of experience of maths at school, you really enjoyed it. It was fun. It was engaging. Do you think you've managed to bring that into your own sort of teaching now? You're in year 2, aren't you?
Yeah.
What does a typical maths lesson look like in year 2? And I should just say, off the record slightly, feel free to talk about schemes or anything else, but if you could not mention, if it's White Rose or whatever, just say the scheme, if that's all right.
Yep.
Just stop us getting into any hot water with anybody. Yeah, there you
go. Yeah, so I mean, going back to what I said earlier about my year 6 teacher, there was a considerable there was a lot of fun in those lessons when I was in year 6, and knowing year 6 now, and it can also not be fun. It can be quite stressful, can be hard for the children and the teacher, but he made school so fun with lots of different strategies, talking to the children about football, which was great because it felt like you couldn't talk to your teacher about football. The fact that we would sometimes play music and he would want to know what you were listening to, and every now and then he would ask you, "Oh, did you win at the weekend?" And for me, that I just knew he cared, and I think that he could have told me anything, and I'd have done it. And I think he could have almost told me anything, and I'd have put my effort in to learn it. So that was sort of where I thought, if I'm going to be a teacher, I want to be like him. So a maths lesson in year 2 for me, when I'm teaching it, it should be. I mentioned Chetwynd was noisy, as in, I think it's organised talk. I think it's raucous. I would say maths should be like that. I am a little bit silly. I try and help children to love school first. And if they love school, I'm going to accidentally teach you something, and I'm going to get you to do something without you knowing. But a maths lesson for me involves lots of children doing a lot of talking. It's a bit of a cliche, but of course, with the idea of mastery, children are using manipulatives for everything, and that's not just physical resources. It could be strips of paper, it can be things that they can move around. But maths should be fun. It should be an element where children feel it's okay to get things wrong. Because I said, having it only been back 2 weeks, I said to my new class, in year 2, I'm going to promise you 2 things, and a lot more later down. And I said, you're going to get a lot right, because I'm going to teach you as well as I can, but I promise you're going to get a lot more wrong. And there was almost shocked a little bit, because I think as teachers we know that, but have we ever told the children that school is about getting it wrong? And a few worried faces, and I said, because I'm going to ask you so many questions, and you don't learn if you constantly get things right. You're going to learn when you get it wrong, and I try and explain it, or we have another go. So there's going to be a lot of that. Lots of me, the children, partner talk, table talk, back to me. I say to the children, hover around, and they was a bit surprised that I wasn't actually hovering. I mean, I absolutely love year 2 because they take everything literally. And if they ask to go to the toilet and you say, yeah, go and wash your hands in the toilet, so I have to be very careful that they don't actually do that. But yeah, I absolutely love maths, and being in year 2 for 6-7 years, I feel like I know it. We've used a scheme for that long. We've adapted it year on year, but I feel like I really know the year 2 content curriculum. Every year we refine the vocabulary. So yeah, I think raucous. I would love it if someone said, goodness me, that maths lesson, whoa, kids are wild, but for maths.
So there's 2 things that you've mentioned there already that I think are really interesting. So one of them, every person I've spoken to so far, Lewis, who's been a teacher, I think has directly or indirectly commented on the importance of relationships in teaching, and being somebody that the children can trust and that they have a good relationship and a good rapport with, and just the impact that that simple thing can have on a child's experience of school. And I completely agree. I spent much more of my career in Key Stage 2 and in Year 6, and I love being there because you could have those conversations about exactly the same sort of things that you're saying, though, about what you've done at the weekend and, how was the football match or the netball match or whatever it was, and just building that trust and those relationships, really important. Being genuinely interested in people, I think, really helps. The other thing that you mentioned was about the atmosphere at Chetwynd and how it is noisy, lively, in a productive, positive sort of way. I don't know if you saw last week, we're recording this on the 9th of September. Last week, the government released some guidance around behaviour things, and there's a little bit of concern that they seem to be aiming towards having quiet classrooms and quiet corridors, and that would be indicative of purposeful learning if the environment is quiet. I've seen that at secondary schools a few times. I'm always slightly concerned when I see it anywhere, really, because to me, and it sounds like you agree, talking is so important to learning and to developing those skills that we talk about, particularly in maths, but in lots of other lessons as well, around reasoning and problem solving and thinking, and developing vocabulary and all those sorts of skills that you need in life. So it'd be sad, I think, if classrooms were suddenly quiet and not full of purposeful talk. There's a difference, isn't there, between total chaos and children talking with
Definitely.
purpose.
Yeah, and I think like you've mentioned, it can be done so well. This talk partner, however you call it, I think can be done so poorly. But I know children in Year 2, at age of 6 and 7, they struggle to not shout out, but they're not shouting out random words. They're shouting out what they're thinking. And I think with kids in my class at the moment, if they're thinking out loud, that's brilliant because I know what they're thinking. If they're thinking silently, I've got no idea. Yes, they're going to journal it down. But again, for children in Year 2, they're not going to journal absolutely everything. And if they do, some children struggle and I might not be able to quite look at what they're doing. But if they're thinking out loud, I can really help. And sometimes they're thinking wrong. And sometimes they're going along the right line. Sometimes they just need a little bit of a nudge to carry on. And I think you made an important point that it needs to be organized. So I need to have that. I mean, some people say that we're a bit like a conductor. I need to know what they should be saying. And that's where I think planning at primary schools, especially lower down, lots of the planning comes in. What are the children going to be talking about? What are they going to be thinking? What am I going to ask them? And it's less of all the things on the slides. Actually, what do I want them thinking about? How am I going to get them to think that? What if they can't think that yet? What if they find it too easy? What if they can't see it like that? That's when you get the manipulatives out. What if they see it like that and they can't see it another way? And I think the whole idea of teaching for mastery is great for those things. But in Year 2 and Year 3, those children, they think out loud. So, but there is a time for quiet as well. And I think it's, like you say, that the report kept coming out. Teachers, it's how we interpreting that. Because as an ECT coming into the profession, maybe getting eyes on that, reading that, they could be led to believe that silent lessons are the best ones. And when we had Ofsted just before Christmas, and she loved maths. She had quite a lot of experience in maths, and she loved the talk, the maths chat. If children are talking about maths with a smile on their face, with enthusiasm, wow, it's amazing. I mean, my assembly, I've just come back from doing assembly, and they've left assembly the worst ever because they're chatting about. And I said, there's a balance, isn't there? You should be silently leaving assembly, but you're talking about maths and puzzles. So
it's what better way to see enthusiasm about anything? If they're talking about that, if they're talking about what they did at the weekend in the lesson, that's that's a different thing, isn't it? But I'll tell you who are the worst though for that sort of stuff: teachers. Honestly, staff meetings and things. Teachers sat talking about anything but what you're asking them to talk about.
It's funny the timing of this, John, because this week for me is quite busy. So assembly this morning, and I'm busy anyway, but assembly this morning, this wonderful podcast recording now, and tomorrow's my staff meeting. It's the first one of the year, and we're actually doing a walkthrough for staff on how best to ensure that the deliverer, the facilitator, gets through the content. People aren't chatting. People aren't just talking about the weekend or things that have happened in the day. That is a really precious
or
time.
sat marking in some cases.
Exactly.
I've seen that.
But we've all done it. Sometimes if I'm not trimming or laminating, I'm thinking about tomorrow's lesson. So I think teachers are definitely the worst, but we expect children to do some of these behaviours. I think, like you say, that personal approach, I want to see the children see me really sit and listen. If they walk past the classroom at the end of the day and we've got a staff meeting, I don't want them to see me sitting back on my chair, spinning my pen, drinking whenever I want. I want them to see me sat up smart, focusing, laughing when it's appropriate, chatting when they said talk to your partner.
Yeah.
Relationships, they're going to trust, we're going to have a great year if there's a joint sort of agreement.
Yeah. No, I love that. Love that. So you're also maths lead, as you sort of alluded to earlier. How long have you been in that role?
That role. So I would say it's 11 years. Quick maths. I would be saying, I think I'm going to say 7 years to nearly every question. But it's,
right, okay.
There
was a big change about 7 years ago.
There's a big
previous
change nationally. But no, around 7 years ago. So mentioned earlier that one of my colleagues was a primary mastery specialist. And I just remember going back to my interview. She was on the interview panel, and I knew she was maths lead. And the head said, when you join Chetwynd, what subject would you like to lead? And I thought, do I go for one that I know there's not a subject lead, because that's quite exciting?
Yeah.
Or shall I be bold and be honest? And I said, math. And she went, oh my days, that's amazing. She said, I really want to lead music and the arts, but we've never had anyone. For maybe two reasons. One, because they didn't want to take something off someone else, but maybe two, because they didn't want it. And I said, I'd love to lead math. So my first few years of teaching was a bit of a transition into it anyway. So even my NQT year, when it was called that there was elements to leadership and maths that I would get involved in. So around 7 years, I would say that I took it over as my own, but we were Ofsted just before Christmas. And then 4 years before that, it was great because I had Gemma join me in those chats, because she had the vision in the first place for the scheme that we use still. And I do agree with it, and the vision's adjusted slightly. But I think for Ofsted, for them to hear that it came from her, I sort of got on board with it, and I've took it and used it, but not just took her vision, but aligned it to my beliefs as well.
That's great. Yeah. So it sounds like maths was already in quite a good place when you took it over, Lewis, or took over leading it, I should say. So in those years, though, obviously we've had lots of things that have happened in that time with COVID and everything else, and natural churn, I'm sure, in terms of staff who go off to leadership roles or other schools and ECTs and things coming through. So I'm interested in, from a maths leadership point of view, what you found effective in terms of raising consistency and confidence in maths teaching at Chetwynd. What have you put in place to support that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a cracking question. I think the culture at Chetwynd allows for this, but we do something called showcase lessons, and that's where subject leads, they choose a date that they're going to teach their subject, and it's a complete open door, and anyone, support staff, catering staff, office staff, anyone could come and see. And I think, and the sort of triangulation of how that looks, I think was really important when our senior leadership team at the time decided, because they said that if I was to do a staff meeting, I should have a showcase lesson either just before it or just after it to showcase it. And that also I should then have some of my own monitoring that I should do very soon, just after or just before that, so that it's not just people sitting in a staff meeting hearing what we should be doing, going back, tomorrow I'm going to plan my English lesson, I'm not planning maths at the moment, and then forgetting it. It's actually, you almost can't escape maths. This week, staff cannot escape me and maths.
It's maths week. Yeah.
Maths week. It was assembly, it was staff meeting tomorrow. In a few weeks' time, we've got monitoring, which is maths, and then we've got a parent open morning, which is maths. But tying in and being clever with everything. If it's a priority this week, can we keep it a priority for a few more weeks? Because that's where we're going to embed things and implement things really, really well. So I think
you get away from that idea of it being something that you've got to do because you've been told you've got to do it. In terms of that observation or monitoring or whatever, and actually it's turning into a process which is useful for everybody. So yeah, that sounds like a great approach.
And I think in my staff meetings, I do try and teach them like a lesson. And I was a bit guilty of this. I've got a really close friend, Tom Challen, and I try and get the adults in the room, whoever they are, to struggle, to be like a child who a struggling learner. If I ask them what to add to is, the majority of my staff would have a good guess. So I try and pick some either GCSE maths or some of the tricks that you see off some of those TV programs on a Saturday to try and get them to think really, really hard. And he answered it and he got it right. And I was so shocked. And I automatically said, "Good boy." And I was like, oh my, it was so patronizing. But I know why I said it, because I was treating it, I was energetic and I wanted them to know how I teach as well. And so I think in my staff meetings, for them to see my genuine enthusiasm, because I lead maths because I wanted to. I said it on day one. I don't lead it because no one else wanted to. I don't lead it because it's one of those that senior leaders tend to lead. I lead it because I want to. And I want the staff to get little bits of my enthusiasm, because it's not normal for people to love maths. It's not normal for people to love numbers and some of those hard things.
It should be though, shouldn't it?
It should be. It should. And for me and you, I know it is. But so I suppose in all that, modelling what I expect teachers to see in lessons, they get to see me, but also dripping in some of the subject knowledge, because I think that's the difficult thing with maths, is that you asked that question at the start, what was my experience of maths? And I've asked that to my staff, and you've got people that loved it, people that hated it, people that avoided it in secondary school when you try and get out of lessons and things like that. So we need to make sure that we're on a similar chapter in order to teach in our school. And so dripping in subject knowledge, and again, in an assembly, in an email sometimes. I mean, they sometimes can't avoid it when they think Lewis is doing assembly or briefing. There's going to be a maths question, but it's to draw out some of that, try and think like a child for a bit.
Yeah, and it all adds to the culture of maths at school, doesn't it? All of those little touch points are really important. So I love that. I know that you've been particularly involved in a process of collaborative planning as well, as a form of professional development, not just to get lessons planned, but in terms of actually thinking about how we approach planning and lesson design. Could you sort of explain a bit more about that for us?
Yeah, so it's something that's definitely not embedded. It's something that is very fluid in that it's changing, but it's something I've trialed at Chetwynd, but probably done most of my collaborative planning outside of my school with schools within either our trust or within schools within my maths work group. And there is a blog I started writing a blog, and it got to the point where I'd hit the word limit. So it's going to be a series of blogs that's going to come soon. And I mean, the blog's, it's not a plug, but the blog's called Plan Maths, but we have a scheme. It's already been planned, because that's something I've heard head teachers talk about. Yeah. But it's the idea really that we're not just going to plan one lesson. We're not just going to say, right, come and show me something you're really struggling to plan. It's not something where I say, right, just open your best piece of planning, talk me through it. It's not something like that. But working with other schools has been really, really useful, because it's opened my eyes to some of the other resources out there. Because at Chetwynd, we do use one specific scheme. There's one or two other subscriptions that we've got that can add to that, but really we use one. But it's opened my eyes to some of the other schemes, and it was also great for the other teachers to see some of the ideas from some of the other schemes. And it's an opportunity where we say pick a year group, we pick a specific strand, so it might be addition, might be subtraction, fractions, or something like that. And it doesn't matter that the other teachers aren't working within that year group, because I remember, and again, let's go back to Ofsted, they didn't ask me much about year 2 maths. And they went to see year 5 maths, and they didn't ask the teachers much about year 5 maths. They wanted to know what had happened in year 4. They wanted to know, well, these kids, what are they doing next year? So I sometimes say to staff, let's plan a lesson that's not in your year group, because you should know what comes before. You should know what comes after. For some of those children, it might be that children are struggling at your current year group and you need to know maybe what they've missed. But it's an
But
opportunity
also, sorry, you're probably going to say it's an opportunity to think of your own subject knowledge as well, isn't it? And also, I do think that sometimes it makes you think a little bit more about the process when you're, again, I taught in year 6 4 years. You show me a year 6 lesson, I don't need to refer to the planning to think about how I'm going to teach it, because I've taught it a dozen times already. But if you show me a year 2 lesson or a year 3 lesson, I'm going to have to really put some thought into how I'm going to approach that lesson to make it the most effective. So there is something useful, I think, sometimes about taking people out of their comfort zone to look at another year group and think about a lesson with a fresh pair of eyes.
Definitely. And that was just a little mindset shift for those teachers, because I wanted to make it valuable, because it takes a while. It's not something that you can do in 5 or 10 minutes. So
that's probably the point, though, isn't it? The realizing why you're doing this. We're not doing this, as you say, we're not doing this so that you can go back and teach this lesson.
Yeah.
We're doing it for a different purpose. So, and that's where the value is. So although
Definitely.
It feels like we're spending an hour and a half or 2 hours planning a single lesson, you're never going to plan all your other lessons like that, are you?
Yeah.
It'd take you forever. But in terms of valuing what you're taking out of the experience, it's the thinking about the lesson in that depth, isn't it?
Definitely. And I think it sort of stemmed from, I'd tried to share how I plan a lesson to 30 teachers, and it didn't quite work because it wasn't specific enough. And there's lots of research around it. And I thought, again, how do I do this? Let's treat it like a lesson. Let's verbalize my modeling with the teachers. Let's give them a chance to think, but then let's also bring it back. And I think the main thing with the collaborative planning element was that we tried to not look at the resource that school used, because once you've seen that, it's very hard to forget it. And if I said plan an activity, they would plan one that was very similar to that scheme's activity. So we sort of picked, let's say, an objective off the national curriculum, and let's made sure that this would be suitable for a lesson, and let's talk about what are the small steps needed. What would the anchor task be? What would a hinge question look like? For all those schools that have different strategies, how can we suit all of those needs? What could the fluency in 5 or whatever you call it, what would that look like at the start? What would your greater depth style challenges be towards the end? Would you put any challenge in the middle? Where would your scaffold be? What would it be? Without opening the textbook and saying, yeah, of course I'm going to do that. Yeah. Just to give a bit of thinking. And it's great for a teacher that thinks of something and they then open that textbook later on. And that is what the maths experts in those companies have thought about. And I suppose it was just an opportunity to question some of the decisions that are in those schemes, because I think as a maths teacher, we are lucky in that there are lots of schemes that I could quickly download and teach quite an okay lesson with the 5 big ideas of mastery in it. But I was conscious that some of our staff weren't understanding that was variation, and this is why we did it, or that's an opportunity for fluency. So I've sort of drilled down into a few questions. So in terms of collaborative plan, the question we was asking is, what is the existing resource and what might be missing in it? So when we're interrogating that, having that thought in your planning process, how well matched is it to the pupils that you're working with at the moment? Because cohorts, they're not always the same. They differ. We have brought into a scheme, but there are going to need to be adaptations for various years. If this is a predominantly weaker cohort, I'm going to have to do something slightly different. And then finally, what will this now look like in the classroom? So yes, fantastic resource. What will that look like? What resources will be out at the start? What will be taken away? Will there be a scaffold for all pupils because it's very new learning? Is it something where the scaffold is going to be a question? So yeah, those are some of the ideas where we do look at one lesson, but it's not about the lesson. Like you say, they're not going to take it and just have to teach it. It's the thinking and getting them on board with some of the questions that I ask myself when I'm planning maths, and some of the questions that I want the creators of some of these resources, I want the teachers to just have a thought of, why is that there? Why did they pick that number? Because lots of the times they're deliberate choices. They're not accidental. So just getting staff, because maths for some schools it is planned. Can you use your planning time to interrogate it? Think why there, why now, what next, what before? Yeah.
So starting with the learning objective, how we going to get from where the children start to, or what is their starting point actually in terms of this learning objective? How are we going to get them to whatever we decide the sort of minimum standard is for the class that we want them to get to before they move on to the next piece of learning? Just to recap what you're saying, Lewis, then looking at the resource, why is it being presented in this way? What are we hoping children will notice by looking at it in this particular way? What might be missing that we could add in? Yeah, thinking about the questions that you might give them along the way, and then thinking about your particular cohort as well, and any particular adaptations that might need to be done to help them to achieve those things, any scaffolds or any additional challenges or greater depth tasks and things. And then what was the final step? Sorry, just remind me your final sort of question or thinking point.
Final question. So what will it look like in the classroom?
How do you pull it all together?
Yeah. How do these slides, the resources, because it might be that you printed something, it might be something that's on the screen, it might be something that they've got on their desk, but how are you going to teach some of those things? What strategies are you going to use? And
and then it all comes back to, doesn't it? You're not asking the teachers to sit there in silence and plan this lesson out, under exam conditions. It comes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is the opportunity to talk it through, think it out loud, listen to other people's opinions, and maybe challenge some of your own assumptions.
Yeah, and I think you've sort of reminded me of one thing as well, that we got to a place, I think, where the teachers, aside from my staff meetings, the teachers weren't really doing any maths because the thinking is almost provided in those resources. So before looking at the models that are provided, can you do the maths? Can you find where the pitfalls are? And I think I'm not asking them to do all the maths that the children are going to do, but I think it better prepared us for those. What we used to think, that was a slight random question, but it wasn't, because if we'd have done that, I wonder what does happen there. And again, it helps with generalizations. It helps with misconceptions. If we're doing the maths, we're able to think, where am I struggling? Where are the quick wins? Where's my time going to go into it? So doing the maths.
It's so important. It's so important because the number of conversations I've had with staff with whatever scheme a school might be using, and they'll say something like, oh yeah, the first part of the lesson was fine, and the guided practice was fine or whatever, and then they gave them this question. Why did they give them this question? It was really hard. We hadn't done anything on this sort of question before. I'm thinking, well, why haven't you done anything on that question? It wasn't a mystery. It wasn't in a sealed envelope. The question's there. You just need to, you clearly, and I know everybody's busy, but you clearly haven't looked ahead or done the maths to see what the children will need to be able to access that question. So I know it sounds daft to think you need to do the maths, but actually when you do the maths, things reveal themselves, don't they, that you might not have considered beforehand. So a really good tip.
And I think when we sort of gave staff a bit of ownership on creating some of their own tasks, they almost just replicated the ones that had just been throughout the lesson. And we got to the point where we questioned in that lesson, had the children remembered it or had they learned it? Because we didn't have much of a gap. When we first did our scheme, we actually did the input in the morning, then they would do the workbook in the afternoon. And that gave an opportunity for kids to eat, chat, talk about random things. And then they would have a go at the workbook. And it was a great idea, actually, because it allowed us to know that they had started to learn it. It wasn't just through memory. Whereas in a lesson, if I've represented a problem, done it with them, they've done another one and another one. Right, here's another one. I wonder whether you're going to get it right. And they get it right. And we think, yes, they've nailed it. And then tomorrow they forgot. And I think it's trying to move towards learning and remembering, and being at Chetwynd, we're shared research quite a lot. So I think we're really lucky that on my interview day, I was given the principles of instruction and by the head teacher and said, can you have a skim over this? And every year there's new research comes out, and I feel quite lucky that Sometimes I don't have to do the reading because someone else has done it, or sometimes I'm given it before I knew it was even out yet. But I think using the research in when delivering CPD, but also when teaching lessons, I think has really helped me to make sure that I know how children learn. And like I say, move toward learning and not just they've remembered this thing that they're going to forget. And we had a education consultant, Jason Wade, who does Rainbow Grammar, and he's, for the first time I'd heard the interrupting the forgetting. There's a curve that you need a little bit of time in between. And since he said that, it's been in almost every single piece of CPD I've been to. But knowing that helps you to plan things, and you look at Mastering Number, how that's designed. Some of the lessons look very similar, but you're not meant to bump them together. They're meant to go to bed in between session 1 and session 2 so that they can forget a little bit. And lots of these newer schemes, newer things coming into education are taking into account that. So we need to make sure that when we're planning, we take into account those same things.
Yeah, that sort of distance retrieval thing, it's really important, the opportunity to do that. I know you're a super busy man, Lewis, as I've already mentioned, all those things that you're currently juggling, and I know you've got things going on in school as well, so I won't keep you too much longer. But if there's a maths lead out there that's interested in running a collaborative planning session, either with, if they've got at this time of year ECTs that have recently started with the school and you're thinking, let's sit down and do some lesson planning together, or with a staff cohort, hopefully they'll be able to refer to your blog soon, and I'll share that when it comes out. But are there any sort of common pitfalls or things that you would avoid doing, having done this lots of times with different cohorts of teachers? Any sort of quick wins or tips for anybody looking to set this up?
Yeah, I think, it could be easy as a maths lead to feel like you have to have the answers. And I've sat there before where I've looked at that lesson that we were going to do, sort of had in my head what I wanted to do. And I did what I did with the children, where I made them guess what's in my head, and they said it. And I was, oh, that's fantastic. So I think it's almost, but then they didn't do an awful lot of thinking. I think it's having staff have the opportunity to think for themselves, because at the end of the day, I don't plan everyone else's maths lessons. I also needed to approach it in a way that after today, how can this be sustainable for them? How can they mirror this? Because I don't want people to wait for when we have a collaborative planning session for them to think like that. So it needs to be really manageable. I've done one where it took hours. We just got millions of resources. We sifted through them, picked. That didn't quite work either. I think having people interrogate one or two other schemes or resources, I think, is important, but getting all of them is unmanageable. I think there's too much. I think we're lucky in maths in that there's so much out there, and there's some real high quality things, and it can be easy to see something on social media, see something on a teacher's account or an email, and just think, that looks amazing, how can I get that into my lesson? But it's asking staff to really think about why they're doing something, make it manageable, that there's not too much there. What can they do that they can take away from today? That if I'm not here, how are you still going to be doing that? And that's where I come back to 4 questions, and it's in the blog. It's, what do I want them to learn? I need to know that as a teacher. What do I want them to learn? How am I going to facilitate them learning that? I'm not going to just tell them it. How am I going to facilitate them learning it? What if they find it too hard? What if they find it too easy? Yeah. And if you think like that, and you have a discussion with one other person in your year group, across year groups, I think if you ask yourselves those 4 questions, I think you're going to make a really, really good start in that collaborative planning. And it's the opportunity for people to ask you, well, why would you do that there? Or, okay, great idea. Have you thought about moving that towards the end of the lesson? Or have you thought about variation, or where is variation in that? But I think going back to those 4 questions is where I go back to when I'm thinking, oh, how would you teach that? Because there are some sticky areas that do really test our subject knowledge, test our patience sometimes. But yeah, I think those 4 questions are the ones that I've always kept with me from day one of teaching at Chetwynd. They were shared with me, and They're so powerful. They're not just for maths. They're for any subject. What do I want them to learn? Because if you can't answer that, yeah.
What's the point? What are you doing?
Yeah.
Lewis, thank you so much for your time this morning. I've got a feeling we will. I know that me and you will be talking again, but I've got a feeling that hopefully we'll be hearing from you on the podcast again in the future, because I've taken loads out of this conversation, and I know other people will have as well. Is there anywhere that people can find out more? Have you mentioned a blog? Is that up and running, or is there a particular place you should go to find that?
Yeah, so blog 1 of the series is on the Derby Research School. So if you head into blogs, there's a really cheesy picture with me and a very well-known maths scheme creator. Bit cheesy.
Right.
And there's a picture of me. I think my beard was a little bit longer, but that I would be looking on there. That's where the next blog will come out. It's looking like a few weeks' time before part 2 comes out. And then, yeah, in terms of socials, don't really do any of that side of things in regards to teaching. So other than that, you might see me around Beeston.
And sadly at the City Ground.
The world famous City
there.
Ground.
Yeah, infamous. Lewis, I'll put a link to the blog in the show notes, so anybody looking for that there. And once again, thank you so much for your time this morning. Really appreciate it, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you, John.
Huge thanks again to Lewis for joining us and sharing so many great ideas.
This is the part of the show where we now discuss the key takeaways from today's interview that you might want to use in your own school or your own practice.
I thought there was loads to take out of today. I know that after you'd listened to the interview, Becky, you messaged to say that this was one of your favourite interviews so far. And I agree. It was great talking to Lewis. I already know him, as we said in the interview, so that was good. But I've always known him to be really passionate about what he's doing. He talks very well about it, and he genuinely loves teaching. And he shared a video this morning actually on socials. I hope he doesn't mind me saying, too late now, Lewis. You put it out there. I'm going to talk about it. He was talking about how he's got so much to tidy up at the end of the night now, because he's got a young son at home, and they've got all this number block stuff out that they get out every night, and they line up the number blocks with the cards and stuff. So maths is very much his passion, and I think you could tell that in the interview.
That really came across, John. It's always lovely listening. Well, I obviously enjoy listening to people talking about maths and teaching, but the enthusiasm that came across from Lewis was really clear, and it did make me think, oh yeah, actually I'd forgotten that, or oh yeah, I could do that. So that was really good, and I have got a whole page of takeaways, which we won't have time for today, but yeah, I did have some key ones.
Go on then. What we got up first?
So, well, I haven't. We won't talk about building relationships. We've done that a few times, haven't we? It comes across week after week, but just goes to show how important it is.
Yeah. But and knowing the children and letting them know you a little bit, turns out that that's quite an important facet of teaching.
Yeah. The one thing I would say is, now I'm in class just one day a week, I appreciate how hard that is for part-timers when you're not there all the time. I mean, you know, you have to really invest the time to do it. Not so easy when you're timetabled quite stringently, but it definitely is worth spending the time to do that. And of course, I mean, I do agree with what you were saying with Lewis, maths talk. I think one of the things I used to love when I was a maths lead was monitoring and visiting other people's maths lessons. Just love watching other people teach. And I think the ones where I could feel the maths and feel the learning were the ones that I enjoyed the most. And those were where there was talk and you know, structured talk in some cases, but talk going on, discussion, collaboration, and, you know, having that really confident environment where people are keen to just have a go. And as Lewis puts it, there's lots of opportunities then for, I think he called it accidental teaching.
I think I did quite a lot of that in my career. But just thinking back again, I spent, as listeners will know, regular listeners will know, I spent a lot of my teaching in Upper Key Stage 2. And I was really grateful for the great early practice that had gone into developing purposeful talk further, earlier in those children's education, because the quality of the talk that goes on in maths lessons in primary school is astounding. It really, really is. And if speaking to Pete Mattock last week about that transition from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3, he was saying he's a governor at a primary school, and so he has the benefit of going into primary schools and seeing what's happening in maths lessons there. And as a secondary teacher, he was amazed, and it made him appreciate a little bit more, I think, what level the children are capable of working at, even in EYFS. You can still get some cracking vocabulary, some fantastic conversations going on all around the maths. And that's where the learning happens for me. It's not when the teacher's talking at the front. It's when you're, as the pupil, managing to express your own thoughts and begin to reason and develop that mathematical thinking. And that all happens through talking, doesn't it? Maybe not all of it. A lot of it happens through talking, I think, before it happens internally.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that is probably where subject knowledge and confidence from an educator point of view is quite important, isn't it? Because actually being able to allow that talk to happen, but also have a bit of guiding in there, because you don't want to give the answers, and you don't necessarily have one preconceived idea of where you want them to get, but you do want to guide them in the right direction to notice certain things and spot certain things. And I think that is much easier to do if you love maths and are confident at maths, and maybe a little bit harder if you're not so sure and maybe have a little bit of maths anxiety.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's probably, again, a reflection of how my teaching changed over the years as I came to love maths and felt much more confident in teaching it and my own subject knowledge. But until then, fake it. Fake it until you make it, Becky, because if you can feel like, if you can show that you are confident and show that you're enthusiastic, even if you don't necessarily feel that inside, and if you can just stay one or two steps ahead of where you want the children to be, then I think that can still have a massive positive impact in the classroom and on the children's perceptions of the subject.
Yeah, I think you're right, John. I'm not with maths, but with other areas. I won't share them in case my class happen to be listening. But other subject areas where I'm maybe not so confident, I do say that to myself. That's okay. I can pretend to know everything there is to know about this. And if I don't, it's okay to admit that. And it's all about learning together and being in that class and in that environment all together.
You've been watching some of my dance lessons, Becky. Is that where this has come from?
Now I want to see one of those.
You don't. It's a horror show. I worked with a brilliant teacher, Mr. Webster, who was excellent at leading dance from the front. He would stand at the front and model all the steps and everything else, and loved it. I would look for my more able dancers in the classroom and get those to as part of their gifted and talented differentiation, I would allow them to support me in demonstrating to the class. So there's nothing wrong with that either, Becky. There's nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely. And as we know, a bit of greater depth, being able to show somebody else something just deepens that understanding and shows that you've done that. So there you go. It ticks another box.
That was my
too.
pedagogical reasoning behind it all. Yeah.
Of course.
It was based in research.
Definitely. One of the other things that came up, and I think we know the importance of this because we have the Maths of Life every week, but very early on in Lewis's interview, he was talking about how he enjoyed maths less when he stopped really seeing the purpose behind it. And I think that's really important, isn't it? I think we often get questions from children, well, why do I need to learn this? Or sometimes even parents in parents' evening will say, well, I don't understand why. I never needed to know this.
Yeah.
But they did, and you do. It's just finding that context. And I think I always share with the children, well, you might do this way or this way. It's not always obvious. It's not always obvious that you might be using algebra when you're calculating what time you might get to your destination or how much fuel you're going to need, but you are. And I think it's important that the children see that there is a context for all of these. It all feeds into a bigger picture somewhere. And doing that, I think, can only help improve engagement. As Lewis was saying, he found maths easier when there was a purpose behind it.
Yeah, I think that there's also, though, a argument to be made for sometimes doing maths just for the fun of doing maths and learning new things about maths. So, whilst I do agree that not being able to see the purpose for something can leave you feeling disengaged from it, sometimes that purpose doesn't always have to be a real world context or real world problem. Sometimes it can just be that the purpose is, if you learn this, then you will be able to do this, or you'll be able to understand this. So yeah, I think those two things can be conflated sometimes. That there's been a bit of an argument in the last couple of years that maybe the GCSE curriculum in England ought to be dumbed down or stripped back from certain things like Pythagoras and things like that, things that you may not need in your day-to-day life. But I think it would be a sadder world in some ways if we didn't give children opportunities to experience those things, because how would they ever know whether they enjoy that side of maths or not if they don't get a chance to engage with it? So I
Yeah.
totally agree that it's just working out what the purpose is and making sure that is clear, I think, probably.
And I think sometimes it's not necessarily about you need to know how to do it this way, but it's actually will help you in future if you knew how to do it this way. We don't
Yeah.
necessarily need to know Pythagoras, but if you were working out an angle for something, you actually would benefit from knowing it. So it's, okay, you might not need to know it, but actually it could save you time and in some cases money later
Yeah.
down the line. So it's
And
finding
look at what you
those.
can do. Look at what you can do with that little bit of knowledge. It opens up all these other areas that you can explore if you want to. So, I think that was interesting. It was interesting as well. I think I mentioned in the interview, Lewis had said that A-level maths was a different beast for him and suddenly wasn't as interesting. Pete had said the same thing last week. I went to college with people who found the same thing when they did their A-level maths courses. So that there is something about it suddenly becoming really abstract. And I think that can happen to children quite early on. It's, not just the good mathematicians who get to A-level and suddenly find things abstract. For some children in year one, this, what you're teaching them is incredibly abstract if we don't make it concrete and we don't make it, if we don't expose the structure of it and help them to see through various representations what's actually happening. So I thought that was a nice way that you could link it back to what you were saying there, Becky.
Yeah, just comes back again to the importance of that representation and structure and making those links, doesn't it? I would totally agree about A-level maths. It was completely different to anything that I'd ever done before. Did manage to get through it, but that was the end of my maths education journey. Didn't take it any further. It was a great interview. As I said, I could keep talking for another half an hour about the things that I took from Lewis's interview, but I think listening to it gives you plenty of ideas that you can take away, or maybe just reminds you of something. One of the things he mentioned was doing the maths first. And when I first started doing mastery way back, that's what we did. We had our own teacher book. We did the maths. That then was something the children could use for marking. But it was by doing the maths that we thought, oh, actually, there's a misconception there. Or actually, sometimes, as you mentioned, there's a mistake there. Mistakes are made. Oh, actually, that's not right. We need something in between. So time is poor, but I think doing the maths first is something that I might go back to doing because I think I'd forgotten about it. It's brought it back to how valuable it was.
Life is so busy, especially in teaching, isn't it? That it doesn't always feel like there's time to do that. But my top tip, if you like, for that was that I would just do that in the morning when I was going through it with. So again, I was lucky to have a partner teacher or a TA. Well, both. But sometimes I had a TA. Sometimes I would talk through the lesson with the partner teacher because I'd planned it and they were also going to deliver it. And those were, just 10 or 15 minutes in the morning. I know there's a million things going on. But if you've got time just to look at not the whole lesson necessarily, but the sort of independent practice that the children are going to be doing towards the end of it, then you've got a better idea of what you need to cover to get them to do that. And even when you're looking at that, when you're planning, it's helpful just to recap it just before you teach it because it's fresh in your head again then at that point. So that's when I used to do those things. Well, thank you for that, Becky. I think that's just about it for this episode. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
If you've enjoyed the show, please do share it with a colleague. You can also leave us a rating or a review because it really helps new listeners to find the podcast.
And we'll be back next Tuesday on the Primary Maths Podcast.
Until then, thanks for listening and have a great week in school.
See you next time.